How's it going, everybody? In today's video, I'm going to take you through the process of building a toy airplane inspired by the designs of Jim Makowicki. Before I begin, I'd like to give a shout out to the woodchuck. May he rest in peace. So basically, I just start out using scrap pallet wood and some cardboard and patterns I had in the shop. Using the patterns, I lay out the design on the wood to serve as a guide when I start cutting them out on the bandsaw. When using reclaimed wood, it's very important to make sure there are no hidden surprises like nails lurking inside your project. Nails or other metal material can cause damage to your tools or to yourself, so always use caution when using reclaimed wood. So now I'm just moving over to the miter saw to remove some of the excess to make it a little bit less bulky when I take it to the bandsaw. So now at the bandsaw, I like to maneuver the piece around, shaping the fuselage of the airplane. Make sure when cutting this on the bandsaw that you cut on the outside of your line. That'll ensure that you don't take off too much material. It's easy to take off, but it's almost impossible to put back. I usually sneak up on my line using a sander or a bench grinder. So now at the sander, I'm just basically shaping the fuselage to look more like an airplane. Using the front disc, I'm tapering the tail end of the airplane itself. It needs to be narrow, probably around 1/2 inch. So I just kind of usually eyeball it. I work it around until I kind of get the shape that I like. Then I round the front end of the airplane also to be able to make sure that my engine shroud fits later, that you'll see coming up soon in the video. This doesn't always have to be perfect either right off. I always come back with sandpaper and just sand a little bit by hand and just keep going and going until you get a shape that you like. Not everybody's going to have the same exact shape, but I like to kind of narrow the tail by hand if I can. All right, moving on to the wings. I usually do the bottom wing probably about 10 inches or so, and the top wing's 11 inches. If you like the measurements, leave a comment below and I'll send you the exact measurements that I use. So now I'm over to the planer. The wings need to be around 1/4 inch thick, so I just take off about a 1/16 to an 1/8 at a time using my planer I got. It's from Viver. Really like this thing. It's it was a cheaper lower end, but I've not had one issue with it to this point. Everything on it has worked fine. So if you'd like to check that out also, there's a link in the description. So now using my $1 jig or paint top, I just mark the ends of the wings and just kind of get the round over. And then using the sander, I just keep forming and shaping them until I get the round edge that I like on there, and then just do top and bottom while you're doing it. Go ahead and get them both into the same stage. Now you can check your fitment and kind of get an idea of what your airplane's going to look like. So it's always pretty nice to see. So now I get the other pieces, which is going to be the tail end of the airplane, and I just lay them out. I have patterns cut. I trace them out on the board. You need 2 to make the doubles, and then the upright tail fin has to be it's a single. So I just draw these out as well, and I use a jigsaw with a small blade. Just take your time, cut them out. You could take it to the bandsaw if you have one available. Then I just back on the sander, kind of ease up to my line. I like to do that. That way I get the exact shape and all sides look exactly the same. So now I just put it back together one more time to show you the progress of it. So now I take the fuselage over to the spindle sander and just taking my time, go around, fix the cockpit, get it kind of shaped out the way you want. And again, it doesn't have to be any particular way. I just kind of like to do it, how I like the way it looks. And so you can actually do, anything you like on yours. And so I just do a lot of hand sanding, doing some shaping, knocking down some rough spots. Then I bring the wings and the tails up, and I just lay them up here, and I just do a lot of handing. I start out with like an 80 grit and just move on from there before I get ready to, do the final process of polying or painting if you want to. Some people paint theirs I've seen a painted one before. I, particularly kind of like the natural wood look, kind of give it that old school look, and then just I continue on with the sandpaper. And the little pieces, of course, they're a lot harder to sand by hand, but I just use a block of wood with a piece of sandpaper wrapped around it, so it kind of helps you pass the time and get it looking the way you want it to look. So now with most of the rough sanding and shaping complete, I like to mark out where my wing struts will go. And so once I get these marked, I usually just put them together with some tape, just any kind of tape pretty much. I like to use painter's tape because it usually will not leave anything sticky or pull out parts of your wood. So I get these marked, and again, if you'd like these measurements, if you let me know in the comments below, I'll get you set up with those. So I tape them together, and then I do one last measure. Always check it twice to make sure that they're in line, and you don't want to drill in and something be wrong later. So now's a critical time before you drill these holes to make sure everything's lined up perfectly. So now I just like to drill a small pilot hole and just drill through both pieces, and then I just change my drill bit. Also, I want to make a note, I do have a scrap piece of wood underneath to avoid some tear out. And then I just go back and do a little bit of hand sanding where the drill bit come through, just kind of get some of those splinters down. So I check everything again, make sure the fitting's right. I get my center, and I go ahead and I mark where the cockpit cutout will be in the top wing. So now with the 1/4 inch dowel rod, I use my handsaw and just cut the pieces to length. And you can cut this with a handsaw, you can use a jigsaw. Miter saw I don't recommend, sometimes it slings the pieces all over the shop. And I even cut them a lot of times with a razor knife. So I go back then with sandpaper and I sand the ends of them a little, round them off. And then with my homemade pallet block hammer, I drive them in just to check the fitting, make sure everything's going together pretty good. On this particular one, I kind of debated on actually cutting out the cockpit access and the top wing. I almost didn't do it, and then I decided to do it just so you can get an idea of what that would look like. And then I sand it around on the spindle sander just to get it smooth inside the crease and the cut. And with a 2-inch hole saw, I cut out just a basic circle that will be the engine shroud on the front of the plane. So using some 1/4 inch laminate, I just mark my holes for the landing gear and just basically take your time. You will have a 1/4 inch axle through for the wheels, and then also you'll have a small hole through for your strut, kind of like a support for your landing gear. So this part here takes a little bit of time to get this right. You have to do a lot of sanding, a lot of shaping. I go back and I cut the triangles out using a razor knife, and it takes a little bit of time. It's not that difficult, but be careful when doing this that you don't slip and cut yourself, because I'm very accident prone. So sometimes I even scare myself when I go back and watch one of these videos and I'm actually cutting this out by hand. But just take your time, move along, and you'll get the holes cut out you need. And also, they don't have to be cut out if you don't want to, but I like the way that looks as well. So glue the tail together, I glue the struts together, and now I'm measuring, marking for my axle that'll go through the wheels. So now, surprise, surprise, more sanding. Now I'm just basically sanding with 220 grit sandpaper just to try to get everything smooth. And I bring out, just this is a piece off of a cat tower. You just got the carpet on it to keep you from getting extra scratches depending on what type workbench you're working on. So I just take my time, sand everything, sand every piece. I then spray the pieces with water and let them dry. This usually helps with the wood. Sometimes there'll be little fuzzies that'll stand up, and you don't want to do that in your final coating, because when you start coating this, it's going to take up some of the moisture and it's going to make it stand up and be rough. So most of the time, spraying your piece with water and letting them dry prior to sanding again, it'll come out smooth when you do your final coats on everything. So now I'm just moving back on to doing some sanding on the tail piece. You want to get everything just as fine and smooth as possible. So in the process of this, I realized that I had forgot to put my little wooden dowels and the tail fin to hold it on better. So now I'm just drilling a very small hole, and using a toothpick, I just cut the point off of it. And I glue it in to the bottom of it, knock it down a little bit, and then cut the end off with a razor knife. And then I repeat the process at the front side of it as well. So then back to some sanding to get it down smooth. I'm using the Tight Bond 3 waterproof glue when putting the wings together. And I just put a little bit of glue in the hole. You don't need a lot, just a little. You know, you don't want to insult the injury, so just do a little here and there. Then I use my hammer and knock it all together, and you just want the dowel rods to come up flush to the wing on the outer side. So there it is put together. And now I just take a dark stain, and I like to stain my engine shrouds with this, just to kind of give it a standout. And it's, you know, basically it's preference. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but I just happen to have stain laying around, so I went ahead and did mine this way. So now I make sure my wings are cleaned off real good. I get my little paint pyramids out, decide to put on a clear coat of poly, top, bottom, strut, everything, just to move along. So these little pyramids, I got those to be able to do one side, set them down, but they don't seem to work too good for me on slick surface. I think I spent more time setting them back up than I did actually polying the project. But next time, note to self, I'll put something non-slip underneath them. So now after my poly dries, I start doing my final assembly. And I just basically put the wings on the fuselage of the plane, and I measure to make sure everything's centered. And I put wood glue in between, and using my brad nailer, I just pop a couple 1-inch nails through the bottom, and then I lay it down and start mounting my landing gear. My axles ended up being a little bit smaller than the holes in the wheels, so when I put my axle through, I realized this, so I decided to cut notches in the axle. So I had to pull the landing gear back off, and then when I glued them on, I just turn them over. I just drive a little wooden wedge piece of a toothpick down in the center to expand them and make them glue better. So now I'm back to putting the landing gear on the plane, and I basically just center it up, and then I've hit it with 2 brad nails as well. Installing the tailpiece, I just use some wood glue down the top side of it and put it down, and I like to put 2 brad nails in it as well. Basically it just holds it in place while the glue dries. Now moving on to the propeller, I just trace out my pattern onto a piece of scrap wood, and then I take my jigsaw, and I don't cut directly on the line again. I just cut to the outside, basically just until I can kind of get the propeller out of the big piece. And then I get back on the sander and kind of shape it as best I can here. Be careful with your fingers here. With smaller pieces, it's real easy to accidentally touch a knuckle to the sanding disc. So now I just use a file to kind of get the center into a round shape. And I move on to the Dremel tool, because I kind of decided I wanted to put a twist look in the blade itself. So trying to just get definition here and make it look more uniform, like something that would actually be on an airplane. So just continue on each blade of propeller with a Dremel tool or file, sandpaper, whatever you got. And I just kind of make an angle to it. So just kind of, take your time, work back and forth, side to side, or you can, just do one end at a time. I also drilled a 7/32 hole through the engine shroud into the fuselage. This will hold the propeller on. I just apply a little glue to the wood pin and mount it there. So now I'm moving on to the last step, which is putting in the rear landing gear. So I just mark center of the body, and I drill a small pilot hole first and angle it toward the front of the cockpit. And then I go back and I drill out the 7/32 hole, make sure the pin fits. And it was a little bit too long when I put it in there, so I took it back out and using a razor knife, I cut off about a 1/4 inch, tested it again, then I took it out, just glued it in place. A couple knocks with a wooden hammer and she's ready for takeoff. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. If you'd like any more information on building one of these for yourself, drop a comment in the links below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.